This vista is incredible.
Which one?
Down the hill from my tower. There's a canyon and then the rest of, well, everything.
Yeah, you should see what I'm looking at. An eagle has been hovering over this gorge for the past hour. And maybe if you're good, you can come by and see it at the end of the summer.
What is going on, everybody, and welcome back to the channel. In today's video, it is my first time finishing Firewatch. This game was not on my radar to begin the year. I had heard about it before. I've heard very good things about it. I've wanted to check it out for a while, but now I finally got the chance. Not really got the chance, but just finally felt like it was the right time to dive into this game and give it a shot and see what all the hype is about and see if it is really one of the best indie games of all time. And we'll be talking about all things Firewatch in this video. So without further ado, let's dive in. So first I want to talk about the gameplay. What exactly will you be doing in Firewatch? I want to save what I think is the most interesting part of the game, which is the story, for the later part of the video, because I have a lot of things to say about that. There's a lot that I want to talk about in terms of this game's story, but let's talk about gameplay first. So in Firewatch, you are a fire lookout, and this game does a very good job of kind of presenting that in a realistic way. I didn't really know anything about fire lookouts or had any interest in fire lookouts before I played this game, and after I finished it, I really started to kind of dive in and look at what a fire lookout really does and see if the game portrays that in a realistic way, and I think it does. Now, I'm just obviously not an expert on fire lookouts whatsoever, but just on a basic level from what I'm seeing, it seems like it does a really good job of, you know, portraying something that we don't really see a whole lot. I didn't know anything about fire lookouts. If you would have asked me if that was a job before I played this game, I'd be like, yeah, it probably is, but I don't really know what that job comes with, what it entails. And the gameplay in Firewatch does a very good job of presenting that in a very good way. So basically, it's a hiking game. It really is a hiking game. You are following along with the story. You're giving things to go and do. You know, look out for fires, go look at the power lines, stuff that goes along with the story. But for the most part, it is a hiking game. So if that sounds like it's your type of thing, then you're going to love Firewatch. If it doesn't, then I would steer clear of this game. It's a very 50-50, you know, you either love it or hate it type of gameplay, where that's not like any kind of crazy action. The things that happen in the story are very interesting, and we'll talk about that, like I said, later in the video. But the gameplay part of it is essentially you are just hiking. You are given a map that fills out the more you play the game. You'll find these supply caches, and when you open these caches, there's a map inside that you can mark down what's on that map to better fill out your map, you know, help you make it easier for you to figure out where things are, mark certain locations, mark pads, stuff like that. I think that's a really cool way to, as the game goes along, you learn a lot more, you learn more information, and also you are given tools throughout the game, you know, a flashlight, your basic things to kind of help you along as you go in this story. Gameplay, it's not like crazy deep or anything like that, and it's not supposed to be. It is a hiking game at its core with a very interesting story that goes along with it. And I think for the story, the gameplay it does its job. It's a very, very chill, relaxed, kind of laid back style. Nothing crazy to it. No combat, no upgrades. It's just a linear, for the most part linear. You can explore off the beaten path and find different things, and you are able to get dialogue options that you wouldn't be able to get if you just followed the main path, which is pretty cool. We'll talk about dialogue later on in the video as well. But just straight up gameplay, it's hiking. Nothing crazy, but it's not supposed to be. This is not the kind of game where you're going to get all this crazy gameplay. So don't go in expecting that, because you'll be disappointed. Go in expecting a very chill, basic, but really gets the job done in a very good way hiking gameplay that, like I said, as you progress throughout the game, the map fills up more, and it feels rewarding to explore and walk around in the forest. It's, like I said, basic, but it gets the job done. It lends to the game's story, and that's all it needs to do. So I think the gameplay in Firewatch, even though there's not a lot for me to say about it, it's not the main part of the game, but it lends itself very well to the story. Another part of the game that I think ties in very well with the gameplay is the exploration in this game. Like I said, you can follow the linear path if you want to. You can just go straight objective to objective, follow the main story, and that's perfectly fine. But there is some benefit to exploring off the beaten path. You can find collectibles, notes that you can read to further the game's lore. There's whole side stories that you can find within, going off the beaten path, kind of exploring. It's a pretty big map. I mean, for the most part, you can look at the map that you're given at first, and there's a lot to it, and you'll explore most of the game's map throughout the main story, but there are certain paths that you can go off while you're going and find these notes. And like I said, there are some side stories that are kind of hidden very well in these notes, that if you want more story, if you want more of the lore and what's going on or what has happened before you have arrived, you can do that. Go off the beaten path, find these notes, and I think that's a very cool way of handling the side content. You can hold on to a lot of what you find. There's even a camera that you can take pictures with that you get. I'm not entirely sure when in the game you get it, but if you want to have a kind of gallery of your journey, that's a cool way to handle that, is just give you a picture, or give you a camera to take pictures with throughout parts of the game, and then at the end of the game you'll be able to see what kind of journey you were going on, and you can see that journey through pictures. I think that's a very cool thing that I didn't take advantage of until I forgot or remembered at the end of the game that there was a camera, and so that was something I missed out on. I think that would have been really cool to take advantage of. So just wanted to quickly talk about the exploration because I think it's handled very well. The side content with the notes and collectibles being kind of a way to explore the game's story a lot more and explore different stories as well, not just having to do with the main story, but also completely different stories that have to do with the location that you're in and the world. So I think that's really cool. I quickly want to talk about the soundtrack. As you guys have known throughout my videos, I'm a big soundtrack guy. I've talked about a lot of the soundtracks in the games that I've played, because I think it's just such an important part of any game for the soundtrack to fit with what the game is going for, and the vibe and the setting and stuff like that. All that comes together with the soundtrack. So with every game that I talk about, I like to talk about the soundtrack, good or bad, and this game is another great soundtrack. It didn't stick out to me as much when I was playing the game, but there are a few story moments where the tracks begin to come in, and then you kind of go back through and you look at what songs were in the soundtrack, and you're like, oh yeah, I remember that. That was such a great moment. I think the soundtrack, when these songs start to play, in the moments that they play, they hit as hard as they possibly could. I think the timing of the soundtrack when these songs start to play is done 10 out of 10 perfectly. It always hits when these songs come in, whether it be the prologue or just any part throughout the game. When there's music that begins to play, it's not a very long soundtrack, it's not a very long game, but the songs that are in this game fit very well, and they always hit exactly at the right moment when they come on. So I just wanted to briefly talk about the soundtrack and give a shout out to Chris Remo. He did a fantastic job with this soundtrack. I'm not sure what else he's worked on, but just based on this game alone, he knocked it out of the park with this soundtrack, and job well done. 10 out of 10. Great job on this soundtrack. Last thing I want to talk about before we dive into the story are the extras. There are two extra kind of modes or ways to play the game that are in the menu that you can do after you beat the story. I think one of them you can actually do before you beat the story, but one of them unlocks after. The one you can do before is an audio tour where the developers have put commentary into certain parts of the game, so you can play through the entire game, and there are these stations where you can put on headphones and you can hear the developers talk about that certain part of the game while you are playing through it. And I remember this being a thing that developers used to do a long time ago. I remember like Left 4 Dead 2, that one sticks out to me, where I feel like a long time ago we saw developers do this a lot with their games, and I think it's such a cool idea to hear what was the mindset, what was their process, their ideas when creating the game. I didn't play through this all the way in this mode, but I did check it out for the first few minutes of the game. I want to save this for if I ever go back for a second playthrough. I think it'd be really cool to play through the game in this way, but that is an option that is there for you if you play through the game for the first time and you want a reason to play it again. This is a great reason, and I think a lot of developers should do this more often because it's always cool to hear developers and how they come up with ideas, different gameplay mechanics, how they created the game essentially. I think that's a very cool thing that a lot of developers should do. And the other thing is open world. You can actually, once you finish the game, go and explore the map to your heart's content. And I did check this out for a few minutes just to see what there was going on, and just from the little bit I played, I think this is something that you could lose yourself in for a few hours, exploring parts of the map that you never got to see when playing the main story, because like I said, this is a big map. There's a lot to this map, and when playing this open world, you get the wave receiver, which is something you get in the main story, and there are parts on the map that are marked that you can go and find cassettes. You can go find the soundtrack, and you hike to all these different kind of corners of the map where these are located, and you find the paths to get to these cassettes, and you can play those and have that be, you can basically have the soundtrack at your disposal throughout exploring the open world in this mode, which I think is cool. There might be other parts to it that I didn't get to. I just wanted to check this out and see what it was about so that you guys knew what you get with the entire game. You get the main story, but you also get these two extra modes that I think both serve their purpose in a very good way and are great ways to play the game, whether you do the audio tour with the developers. Campo Santo, which I haven't shouted them out yet, they did a phenomenal job with this game. Their first game, they are apparently working on a second game, but I don't think the game's ever going to come out when I've looked into it to see what they were working on. They got bought out by Valve back in 2018, and it seems like they've just been kind of support studios and just kind of been help on Valve's projects. So I don't think we'll ever get to see their second game, but they did a fantastic job on this first game. So with the audio tour and the open world, these are two other ways that you can play this game and get some enjoyment out of it aside from the main story. Speaking of the main story, let's dive into that. That is the part of the game that I am super excited to talk about. I want to split this into two different parts. First part's going to be non-spoiler. I just want to give a basic plot premise and talk about a couple other things. And then that second part, I will be diving into spoilers. So I would recommend, if you haven't played Firewatch, go play it if you're interested at all in what I've said so far about the game and it looks like your type of thing. It's on Game Pass. I think it's probably pretty decently cheap, maybe like $20. I could be wrong about that. Catch it on a sale. It's a short 3-4 hour game that you can finish in a sitting or two, and it is definitely worth playing. But I would go play it, and then if you want to come back and see what I think about the main plot points and the ending, then you can get into that story spoiler section. But this first part is spoiler free. I just want to give a basic plot premise. So you play as Henry. In the prologue of this game, it gives you a choice-based way to develop the background of Henry, the main character. You pick between different choices to further explain and go through the relationship of him and his wife, Julia. You know, they'll get a dog and how they met and how they were around each other. And you can see that as the prologue goes along, at different points, that breaks up the choice-based system thing with you walking in the forest at different points. So as the prologue goes on, you can see Henry's relationship with his wife gets worse and she develops dementia. And he sees a flyer in the paper for a summer job for a fire lookout job, and he takes it. That is what the prologue is about. I won't go further into that. There's a lot of, in this very short prologue, different ways that you can kind of give Henry's backstory and his motivations and stuff like that for the rest of the game. And I think it's really cool. I think it's a really cool way to do a prologue instead of just kind of, you know, having the game start without that prologue section and him explain it. You don't really get to, you know, have that feeling of, you know, you had a say in his background. I think the prologue is done very well. And then once you get into the game, you get to your fire lookout tower, you meet Delilah, who is your supervisor for the entire summer. She is at a different lookout tower that you can see from your tower, but you guys talk via radio. And these two characters and the dialogue between them are the highlights of the game. The writing, along with the story, are just 10 out of 10. The writing between these characters, it feels so real. It doesn't feel... The writing is one thing, but then the voice acting, for them to come in and make it feel real and sound real, just like a casual conversation, not, you know, this kind of robotic, stale dialogue. There's like stutters and there's pauses and there's all these things that you would, you know, obviously hear in a real conversation in this dialogue. And the dynamic between the two characters is great throughout. That was, I found that out early on. That was one of the things that jumped out to me, was how good the dialogue was and how many funny moments and just pieces of dialogue that would just make you smile or laugh out loud that there were throughout this game.
You know, I don't think there's any fictional character I hate more than Forrest Burns.
Henry, as an employee of the Forest Service, that is treason.
Yeah, well, he really freaked me out as a kid.
He inspired me to spend the bulk of my 30s keeping the wilderness safe.
A shrink would have a field day with you.
Thanks, Mom.
I feel like I'm going to be murdered when I'm in the outhouse.
Feeling a little exposed, are we?
Hey, no man in the history of the world has felt tough with his pants around his ankles.
Well, be strong. You can always call if you're having trouble.
Sure, I'll do that.
Pears, pears, pears! Yes!
What the hell?
I'm doing a crossword and I figured out the theme. It's homonyms. Pears, pears, pears. The clue was couples peeling fruit. Anyway, hope you're having a good afternoon.
Thanks. I found a bra.
A nudie pyromaniac. Remain professional.
There are, panties?
There are what?
I don't want to say that word again.
Why, 'cause you're 12?
Brian Goodwin sewn into the top.
Huh. Wow.
Do you know him?
Yeah, I just haven't heard that name in a few years.
What, was he a fella you had a thing with?
Yeah, it was so hot and heavy. Of course, Brian Goodwin was 12 years old, so, you know, our love could never really be understood.
Ugh.
I I'm kidding.
So as Henry, you go throughout the story, and there are a lot of crazy things that happen. Like I said, I won't get into spoilers here. I just wanted to give you a basic plot premise, give you a feel for what the game is about to offer you and what kind of journey the game is going to take you on. The writing is fantastic, the dialogue is fantastic, and as we'll talk about in just a second, the story is one of the most interesting stories I have experienced and played through. And throughout all the games that I've played, this game, it had me thinking in a lot of different ways, and we'll get into the spoilers right now. One final disclaimer, this will be the part of the video that has spoilers for the story, so if you haven't played Firewatch, or don't want the story spoiled, if you plan on playing it in the future, skip this part of the video. You've watched the entire part of the video without spoilers. You can skip this part, no worries. But now let's dive in and talk about spoilers. I want to go through the story and the plot as a whole, and then we'll talk about the ending, which is so notorious, I feel like, for game endings. So after you get to the tower and you meet Delilah, your first step is to stop these teenagers from shooting off fireworks. You see this, in the distance. Delilah tells you to look out. You see the fireworks, you start freaking out. And then you go and you deal with the teenagers. Once you get to the lake where they are at, you kind of freak them out enough to make them run away. And that's pretty much that. You end up going back to your tower that day. And on the way back, you do see this shadowy figure that kind of just runs away. You see him for a second. And, Delilah makes a smart comment about how there are other people out there. It's not just you. But you don't really think much of it. You get back up to your tower on the first day, and it looks like it's been ransacked. Things have been thrown around all over the place. Things have been taken. You kind of freak out about that. That is a little weird. Delilah thinks the same way and tells you that she'll look into it and see what's going on with that. So the next day, Delilah wants Henry to go check out a communication line that's been cut. And when he goes and does that, he gets to the line, it's been cut, and he figures out that it was the teens from the day before that were at the lake shooting off the fireworks. And they plot together. They want to scare these teenagers off. Don't want to deal with them throughout the entire summer, so they want to scare them away. And when Henry gets to the teenagers' campsite, it's also been ransacked and abandoned. And it looks very suspicious, like, what's going on here? Was it bears? Was it someone else? There's kind of a mystery beginning to form here with these teenagers, and they are reported missing. And the Henry and Delilah trying to figure out and decide if they should, give their side of the story and let the people that reported them missing know that, they were last seen at the lake. But they decide not to do that and to just kind of hide away from that. So while they are out hiking, Henry does find an old backpack that has that camera I was telling you about earlier on in the game that you can take pictures with. And it belonged to a boy named Brian Goodwin, who then Delilah tells us that his dad, Ned, they were both former lookouts. It was Ned who was the lookout, and he brought Brian along with him. And Brian was not supposed to be there. There was not supposed to be, two people there at the same time. It was just supposed to be Ned, and Brian was there. And Delilah, she liked Brian and did not mention to anyone that he was there. And apparently they left and never came back. It was very, very sudden, and they never came back. So this game does skip around time-wise. You do start off, it's day 1, day 2, but then it skips ahead a few weeks, a few months. And after a few months, there's a small fire that breaks out. And then a couple weeks after that fire breaks out, there is a radio and a clipboard that Henry discovers while he's going fishing. And on this clipboard, there are transcripts of the conversations, every conversation that Henry and Delilah have had while Henry's been there as a fire lookout throughout the last few months. And they find this super suspicious. I would freak out too. I mean, having all of your conversations, the stuff you wouldn't mind people hearing, the stuff maybe you wouldn't, that you would mind people hearing, all on document. It's all documented down. And after he finds this out, he's wanting to figure out, okay, who is doing this? And then he is from behind, hit in the head, and by someone he doesn't know. No idea who it was. Randomly, he is attacked, he is beaten unconscious, and he wakes up, and the clipboard and radio that he found are gone. On the clipboard, Henry saw a meadow that was referred to, and he ends up finding a fenced-off government research area. They freak out about this. It's in the middle of the woods. It kind of stands out as, a fenced-off area. You find this in the beginning of the game, but you don't think much of it. And now it is a big plot point of what is really going on here. What is this research area? So they break in, and he finds all of this high-tech surveillance equipment and these reports, again, of a lot more of Henry and Delilah's conversations and also backgrounds. It looks like there's research and studies going on based on these two people and two more people. Very creepy, unsettling, things that you find and feel like, this is a huge invasion of privacy. What is going on here? They both, they're really disturbed by this, or they're freaking out, and they almost decide to destroy the camp. Delilah wants to destroy the camp, but Henry is against it. They thinks it's a bad idea, so that is not what happens. But as soon as Henry leaves the camp to go back to his tower, the government research area of the camp has had fire set to it, and now it's on fire. And there's a recording of Delilah that says that we should, destroy this camp. We should set fire to it. So it looks like it is framed for them to have looked like they have done it. Earlier on in the game, you find a locked cave, and you don't think much of it. Delilah gives you some background on it. Nothing crazy about it. But now, Henry finds a backpack the next day, and there's a tracking device in that backpack with a key to this cave that's been locked up. Delilah then reports that there is someone in Henry's tower, and when he goes up to that tower, there's a Walkman that is taped to the door that has that recording that I said earlier that incriminates Henry and Delilah about destroying the camp. And then the next day, someone else who is trying to impersonate Henry calls another lookout and claims that Delilah is the one who caused the fire. And it just puts Henry and Delilah more on edge as this mystery keeps going and going. And at this point, the story is just going in so many different places that I did not think it was going to. It has me, it's got its hooks in me. I am waiting to see where this game is going to go and how it is going to end. Henry then uses the found key he found in that backpack, enters the cave, but then he's locked inside. He doesn't see who does it. He's locked inside. There's no way to get down, and he has to find a way to get down. He goes back outside. He finds anchors that he can use at Brian Goodwin's secret camp. He's got all these different drawings, and he's a very nerdy kid. He's got, math equations and all this kind of stuff that you would see from a 12-year-old, like a Dungeons and Dragons kind of rip-off type thing that he's been playing. All these cool things that, you would expect to see from a 12-year-old who is kind of isolated with his dad in nature, trying to find things to do. And he gets those anchors, Henry does, and he's able to travel down into that cave, and he finds the decayed body of Brian Goodwin. And it is made to look like an accident. It is made to look like he was rock climbing or doing something in that cave and fell to his death. And he tells Delilah this news, and she's obviously very upset about it. And the next day, there is an order that is given to the lookouts, that the wildfire that has been spreading throughout this entire game has now gotten to the point where they need to evacuate. The tracking device then starts to beep again as he is trying to leave. He follows it and he finds a tape recording from Ned Goodwin, Brian's dad, and he is revealed to be the figure that Henry has seen throughout the game. He claims that Brian's death was an accident and that he fell because he was not experienced with climbing, and that after this happened, Ned, who was a veteran, a war veteran who has PTSD, doesn't want to return to the society after this has happened, and he's lived in the area ever since. He's been in the area for all this time, and as soon as Henry and Delilah were getting close to figuring out what had actually happened, that's when Ned decided to make all this happen. Ned is the mastermind behind all of the game's plot. He warns Henry not to look for him. Henry finds Ned's bunker that has a perfect view of Henry's tower, and it also gives the player a lot more backstory and a lot more information on the game's plot points throughout, seen through the point of Ned. And the teenage girls from earlier, that was a plot point that didn't really even matter because they were found to be safe. Nothing happened to those girls. And so when this happens, when I got to this point in the game, I was very underwhelmed. All this throughout was building up to this crazy ending, and once the truth behind everything was revealed, it was just, to me, I was like, wow, really? That's all that happened? That, just very underwhelming. So we get to the ending. Henry travels to Delilah's tower, and on the way there, Delilah says that the helicopter is there. There will be another one. And Henry obviously wants Delilah to stay, but Delilah gets in the helicopter, and as Henry gets to Delilah's tower, he goes up to her tower. As we see the view from the other protagonists that we've had in the game, we see the environment that Delilah was in, all the books and the drinks and stuff like that we've kind of had this idea of throughout the entire game, and now it is there and we're able to see it, and we get one final conversation with Delilah. And depending on how you have felt throughout the entire game, or how conversations have gone throughout the entire game, when you leave your tower earlier on in the game, you have the choice of your wedding ring. Do you put it on? Do you leave it? What is your feeling on the relationship between you and your wife, Julia? She has dementia. That has been discussed throughout the game between you and Delilah. What should you do when you get back home? And for my playthrough, I left the wedding ring. I thought, there wasn't a lot there. It didn't seem like there was a lot left there in that relationship. As much as that sounds like a bad thing, that is the reality of the situation that you have to figure out and deal with. So when I went to the tower and had that last conversation with with Delilah, I said that, we should keep in touch. We should see if this, dynamic between the two of us can turn into an actual relationship. And she turns Henry down. And that just kind of also went into how underwhelmed at the ending I felt. But after you leave, you have that conversation with Delilah, you both kind of figure out plans for each other, you get on the helicopter, and the game ends. So after the ending, very underwhelmed. But then, as I do with a lot of games that I finish, I looked into, am I crazy? Hey, do other people feel the same way? And a lot of people did. But there's a lot of people who took a different approach to the ending. if you look at the ending of this game from the perspective of you as the player, you might feel underwhelmed because you expected a lot more from the story. You did not expect, with Ned and Brian, for that to be the whole reason behind the crazy directions and mystery that this game goes on. And then also with Delilah and how underwhelming that felt, you might feel super underwhelmed and be like, wow, that was a bad ending, that was super rushed, they could have explored that a lot more. But if you look at the ending from the perspective of Henry and from Delilah, it is one of the best endings that I've experienced in a game. And that's crazy. I've never had that happen where there is a severe jump in how I feel from finishing the game and then looking into the game after and feeling like, wow, that is a unique way to tell a story and have an ending. It is a realistic ending, and that is why it is so good. You feel like, as Henry, and you can, look back through it, even play through it a second time, and Henry feels the same way that you do. When Henry discovers that it was Ned behind the entire thing, when he's reading all these things in his bunker, he's almost disappointed that all of this mystery and intrigue was just from one guy and not anything crazier than that. And with Delilah, you build up this expectation that she's going to say yes, you guys are going to meet, walk off into the sunset, and have a happy ending. But when she turns you down, if that's the direction you take, maybe you stay loyal to Julia, and that conversation at the end is very different. Then when you get turned down by Julia, it's like, wow, now, what do I have to look forward to? I took this job as an escape from what I was dealing with in real life, and now I have to go back to that and figure out, what's next for Henry. When you look at the ending from the perspective of the player, I can see why you might be very underwhelmed, because I was too. But if you take the ending and look at it from Henry's perspective and tell yourself that, he feels the same way you do about the entire thing, this ending is realistic. And there's not a lot of games that are willing to do that. And that's why the ending has been so polarizing to everyone who has played it, because it doesn't take the standard approach to an ending. It's not a happy ending. It's not, the story doesn't end on this crazy climax. It ends on basically the same note that it began with, where you have to return to society and you have to deal with the trials and tribulations of real life. And when I looked at the ending from that angle, I was blown away. I mean, not a lot of games do that, and this game did it in a fantastic way. I know I've gone on for a long time talking about the story. This is the part of the game that I really wanted to dive into and talk about, because there's so many things to say, and even though I've gone on for a long time talking about it, there's a lot more that I could say, but I want to keep it decently short and brief, even though I've talked for a minute. The Firewatch ending is one of the most interesting endings I've ever experienced, and it's also one of the best endings I've ever experienced. So that is going to do it for my first time finishing Firewatch. This game really surprised me in a lot of ways. I'd heard so many good things about it, and even though the ending can be seen through multiple lenses, and it could be 50-50 depending on the way you look at it, if you just heard my whole deep dive into it, the whole game, the story, the atmosphere, the soundtrack is done so well. It is one of the best indie games that I've played. I think it does deserve that connotation and that title on top of it, as well as one of the most interesting endings I've ever experienced. The story's fantastic. I had a great time with Firewatch. I definitely recommend going and experiencing it for yourself, going and trying it out. It is on Game Pass. That's how I played it, but also fairly cheap. Pretty sure it is $20. Could be wrong about that, but it should be around that price point. short 3-4 hour game that you can finish in 1 to 2 sittings. So that will be it for the video. Thank you guys for watching. Stay tuned for more videos coming down the pipeline, and I'll talk to you later.